How's it going, folks? I'm Kowalski. Welcome to Prairie Fire. I kind of wish I was next to a fire as it is about -5 degrees out today. However, there is no wind, so at the very least, if you're bundled up, you're probably good. But yeah, as the title would suggest on this video, I wanted to talk a little bit about technological stagnation because, as you can see behind me, I came to bring my cows some feed on this cold morning. And this is very similar to what my dad would have done, my grandfather, great grandfather, and probably even his great grandfather. So let's get into this. You can see the steam pouring off these animals. They need this alfalfa. Now, for a long time, we basically did scientific innovation through trial and error. Through the eons, we figured out what did work, what didn't work, and usually this was learned the hard way through trial and error, brute force, lose a bunch of people doing it one way, learning that's not the way to do it, and then doing something different. This wasn't very efficient, and we then later developed something called the scientific method. This was an innovation about 300 years ago, and ever since, we have been seeing a massive increase in our understanding of the universe and technological innovations that have come from that. So, let's discuss a little bit about what the scientific method is. Basically, you come up with a hypothesis, something that you believe is correct, and then you've come up with a series of tests to determine whether or not your hypothesis was right or wrong. If it turns out to be correct and you can corroborate that with the test that you have created, you will then publish that so other people can take a look at what you did, try to replicate what you did, and expand upon it. If it turns out to be right, this can sometimes turn into what's called a theory, and after a theory has been tested by many and it has had more publications done, it will eventually become like a law. So, um, this has been very good for us to develop an actual understanding of how the universe works. Like, we know using the scientific method how cells are structured in living organisms. We know that atoms are the building blocks of life, or not life, that's the building blocks of the universe. Cells are the building blocks of life. It is freezing out. Now, by discovering these truths or like laws of the universe, we are able to come up with a better understanding of things like metallurgy. We now know when combining certain metals to make alloys, you get a certain type of outcome. This is different from alchemy, which was kind of seen more as like a recipe when cooking food, as opposed to a hard science. For the most part, the scientific method has been the thing that has given us this massive amount of technological innovation over the last 300 years. There's pretty much no argument there. One of the reasons that we have the scientific method and we have all this technological understanding is because of universal education. Now, universal education, as we know it today, came out of basically the Prussian model. Prussia was basically northern Germany. It was a big German state. It was considered one of the five great powers of Europe in the 17 and 1800s. Now, what set Prussia apart from a lot of its neighbors is that it had universal education for men. Basically, everybody was required to get what is, I think, the equivalent of an eighth grade education. And if you think about that, compared to all of their neighbors like France, Austria, Russia, or not the other German states, but Britain, this meant that the average German knew how to read, write, do basic arithmetic, and they could communicate better with the people around them because it simplified the language. This is actually very key in communications because when you have even a dialect difference, this can make it harder to convey ideas. But when you bring people together into one place and you give them a unified education, you can build common understanding. And this was pivotal for Germany to develop basically a bunch of the brightest minds of the 1800s. There was a massive amount of like just geniuses that kept coming out of Germany in, the sciences, in physics, chemistry. Uh, and the reason for this is when you have universal education and you take everybody's kids and you give them the opportunity to get an education, there are some people through just sheer random genetics, sheer randomness of the environment will be brilliant people. And when you can find those people and then, you know, give them the resources necessary to become, the master of their craft, this benefits all of society because now you have this genius who could have been pulled out of obscurity, who may have only had a life of, like a basic peasant existence, into being a lead academic at a university. This is absolutely pivotal at increasing the odds of finding, the truths of the universe. So, universal education, absolutely pivotal for this technological innovation to work. Now, that being said, I think a lot of us have noticed that technological innovation seem to have slowed down in a lot of different fields. You know, um, Commercial airplanes today aren't really much faster than they were in the 1970s, and that's because there are trade-offs when you are doing anything. This is the efficiency effectiveness paradox. So, you could build a plane that can go faster than the speed of sound, but you will be burning more fuel to do that, and therefore it would actually cost you more to do that. When you go beyond the speed of sound, it takes more energy to do that, and the actual disruptions, like the actual physical wear and tear on the plane, increases. So it really doesn't make sense to do that. So planes have kind of all begun capping out around 600 miles an hour, something like that. Maybe you can get into a jet stream and go a little faster, but we know that you basically should not go above the speed of sound. So there has been kind of a pause on the actual technology. Semis are another big one. A lot of semi fleet companies will have their trucks cap out at about 65 miles an hour because this is kind of the sweet spot between fuel economy, use of time and resources. It's just when you go beyond that, you get more air resistance, so it takes more energy to get beyond that. There's also some safety things that come into play, braking distances, stuff like that. So we've been able to achieve over 65-mile-an-hour semis for what, 50 years? But for the most part, there's no incentive to do so because we're running into one of these technological pushbacks. It's almost like a speed limit. In agriculture, more specifically, we've been seeing a lot of issues in like take meat packing, for instance. Are we going to develop a more efficient means of butchering animals? Probably not. We essentially don't even have waste anymore out of these processes. Like, even the trimmings off of a cow are bound together using what's called meat glue and made into lower quality steaks. So, we don't even really waste any part of the animal. We also, in most of the modern meat packing facilities, have the entire process broken down into essentially like a Ford style assembly line where everybody is set to doing one task very efficiently on a massive scale. So there really isn't any more innovations to be had there. We've kind of done it. This is one of those issues where prior to the last 300 years, we didn't really have like a scientific means to gauge whether or not we were going in the right direction at utilizing our resources, but now we do. In fact, we've kind of been at this point in meatpacking for like 40 years. That's why it really hasn't changed. The only difference is scale. There are also limitations in other things other than agriculture. When it comes to microchips, there's actually a limit to how small we can make them. It's the tunnel that you send an electron through. Without really getting into the details of it, electrons can actually basically phase in and out of an area if it's too small. Um, Heisenberg uncertainty principle, not important right now, but basically, we will reach a point where we can't make microchips any smaller, which means the innovation there is done. Now, yes, barring quantum computing, but I'm not getting into that either. This is just talking about like the limitations of material science. I also think a lot of people are not really aware of how long technologies have existed. So, being a guy, let's talk about like wars for a second. Um, Wars are a good way at measuring the technological level of a society because a war is something that basically a country is willing to throw all of its resources in because nobody wants to lose those things because they're pretty important. So let's talk about four different eras and the type of technology we had in each And I think this will kind of demonstrate how we've had a lot of advanced technologies for quite a while and how we're kind of reaching this pushback on the ability to innovate further. So, think about the US Civil War. What were the technologies we had during that war? The Confederates actually did build a submarine. It was not a very good submarine, but it was a submarine that could fire torpedoes. A lot of people think that's a World War I invention. It's not. The precursor to it was over 50 years prior to World War I. Another thing we had during the Civil War, airships to do reconnaissance of a battlefield. It wasn't World War I where this innovation came out using airplanes. It was with hot air balloons. And I mean, technically, even the French experimented with this during the Napoleonic conflict. They were nowhere near as good as the ones in the Civil War, and the ones in the Civil War had telegraphs hooked to them, which helped with communications. But I think this can kind of demonstrate how we've had the ability to do a lot of these things. It's just kind of a question of scale. Another invention people think of with the First World War is the machine gun, but no, we actually had Gatling guns during the US Civil War. So if you took a soldier from the Civil War and plopped him into this First World War, a lot of the stuff he would already have been aware of. The big change would have probably been chemical weapons for him and just the sheer scale of everything around him, like the amount of artillery that would have been around, the amount of machine guns available was much higher. But the fundamental understanding of those technologies all existed during the Civil War. And then you compare World War II to World War I and try to think of what were the actual technological innovations between these two. And basically, missiles and jet technology are the two big ones that most people would have been aware of, and then obviously atomic weapons. But then if you think about it, atomic weapons have been around now for almost 80 years, and have we built anything that is more destructive than those? Technically, no. Yes, we've scaled up their destruction, but fundamentally they operate under the same principle. We haven't figured out a way to make a better doomsday weapon in 80 years. The mad scientists should be, disappointed. Now think about the technology from today versus World War I, World War II, and even the Civil War. A lot of people would point out that, oh, like our tanks today would steamroll any tank from World War I, and that is true. However, a 15-inch gun off of a US ship during the First or Second World War would still be able to absolutely punch a hole in a modern US destroyer, if you could get close enough. An artillery piece from World War I would still have been just as capable of mangling a modern Abrams tank as it did tanks back in those days. These are fundamental rules of physics. You can't really overcome these things. It's just force and mass. Now, obviously, modern computing technology today has been the biggest game changer in the last 40 years. But even then, think about the actual amount of technological improvement we've seen in our day-to-day lives from 2010 versus 2025. Today, we have social media. Back then, we had social media. Today, we have personal cell phones. Back then, we had personal cell phones. There hasn't really been a big bump. And even the big changes we have had basically haven't done all that much to move the needle. The reason for that is because things today are far more complex than they were 100 years ago. Basically, it's easier to go the first 100 yards in a mile than it is the next 100 yards, and then the next, and then the next. It's just more resistance. So I want to bring this back to economics real quick. One of the ways you grow an economy is through technological innovation and expanding markets. So, what happens when a market now includes everything in the nation? What about a global market? What happens when you've reached global saturation of a market? Is there any more room to grow? Fundamentally, you would have to increase your technology, but what happens when you start getting pushback from the limits of technology? Essentially, you're running into a bit of a pickle there, aren't you? You can't have perpetual growth as you would in a normal market system when there is no more markets to expand into and there are no more technological innovations to be had. Take air travel, for instance. Are we really needing to build more airports in the United States and Europe? Arguably, probably not. Do they need to build more in China? Probably not. Could you build more in, say, Africa? Maybe. But once that's done, what's left for the market to expand into? Because we've already stated you can't really improve the technology of the plane. And any innovation you have with that is going to be very marginal. So, what exactly do you do when your economy has reached a technological as well as a market saturation threshold where any added input into that industry would not give you a return? Well, basically, you have to run it as a nonprofit because fundamentally, we still need airplanes to transport people. It's just these things now need to be operating in such a way as they are a public utility as opposed to a money generating endeavor. This is also true with things like meatpacking plants. There's basically no more innovations to be had, and everybody on this planet who wants a burger has access to a burger. Fundamentally, what we need to be working on is better resource management as to just not be as detrimental to the environment as we can, because at this point, there's no more innovations to do. There are no more, we're not going to find a better way to cut up beef at this point. I hope they're not listening too hard to me on that one. You guys are safe. Don't worry. The issue we have now is that there are a lot of businesses out there that are essentially cannibalizing the industries that they are in order to have greater returns. So take Tyson, for instance, the meatpacking plant they are closing in Nebraska. They are closing that plant and they are preventing anybody else from being able to purchase that plant to have greater market share. Is this good for consumers? No, the price of beef will go up. Is this good for the locals? No, they just lost a big employer. Is this good for the United States? No, this doesn't give us any more economic dominance. It's bad all around for everybody except the shareholders of the company. So I ask you, does it make sense to run a meatpacking plant for profit if they aren't actually creating anything that is worthy of having higher costs? No. Basically, we have a bunch of businesses that need to be operating but are no longer going to be able to generate these massive returns and therefore should be treated as non-profits. Which isn't a bad thing. We need to keep the quality of life going for people because with this increased complexity in understanding technology, we actually need to ensure more opportunities for more people than ever before because we need to keep finding geniuses. Anymore, the questions of the universe that need answering are going to require a monumental number of people to do. And for that, we are going to need to ensure that we have a good quality of life for the maximum number of people, not just in the United States, but all over the world. Through these numbers, we will find the next great innovation and improve the quality of life for all mankind. Also, mankind is from the Old English term where man is actually gender neutral. Do not at me. So yes, we need to shift our economy not towards making profits for the few, but increasing the quality of life for the many as to maximize our chances of finding the people who are going to create the next great innovations and expand the opportunities for all of us. This means having adequate health care for all, adequate housing for all, adequate expectations for life. We need people to believe in a future, and we can only do that by showing that our society actually improves your well-being. That's what I believe. We need to have an economy for quality of life. And having these increases in quality of life is good because it'll mean people will live longer. So the time we invest into them, they'll be able to give back to us at a greater, return. It would also just be the right thing to do. It's kind of the golden rule. Well, folks, I think that's it for now. I am officially frozen, and these guys are good. I will catch you on the next one. I can't do the thing, it's too cold.